Well, we are taking roughly 50 to 100 a day, which is, from a security aspect, the normal amount that we can take from a security aspect point of view. That happens normally on a given day.
What's the security aspect there?
The security aspect is to make sure that decent people come across the border and not Daesh or ISIS or terrorists come across.
Do you have evidence that that they are linked to this Daesh or so-called Islamic State?
This is on a normal, regular
but now,
refugee
as we
aspect.
See, are some of them trying to come in who are linked?
They have been trying to come in since the crisis started. So that's usual refugee procedures. Now, what you're talking about is a completely separate group out in the eastern desert that come from Raqqa up in the north of Syria, Hasaka, and to an extent slightly south of
territory controlled by the so-called Islamic State.
What we call Daesh,
yes.
Right? We know that inside that camp are Daesh elements. So they are going through a very strong vetting system. We do process dozens of them every single day. The priority is given to the children, the women, and the elderly. All top medical cases do come over. We are treating them, and actually quite a few of them do end up staying in Jordan. It is in a military zone, but having said that, our government, our military, the UN, NGOs are actually across the border in those camps. We have our clinics set up, and we are trying to look after them. So all
you are
supplies,
going to let them in?
At this stage, we let them in as they are being vetted. There is pressure from the international community to let them in, but we're saying to everybody, this is a major national security problem for all of us. Some people are saying, well, why don't you let the women in? But as we've seen in Paris, we've seen in California, women are also part of terrorist strikes around the world. So this is for us a red line. We are trying to process them as quickly as possible. But again, we throw back to the international community and to those countries that are being very difficult to us, saying at the end of the day, okay, you're saying there are only 16,000. We've already taken 1.4 million people. If you're going to take the higher moral ground on this issue, we'll get them all to an airbase, and we're more than happy to relocate them to your country if what you're saying is there are only 16,000. Considering the amount of people we've taken into our country, if you want to help the refugee problem, 16,000 refugees to your country, I don't think is that much of a problem.
Has anyone taken up your offer?
Of course not. So,
but if they don't, what?
So
Europe is saying to you, we don't want no more refugees.
No,
you're saying we don't want any more refugees. Where do they go?
We will continue to bring them across in limited numbers. We will continue to look after them on the other side, and we will continue to vet them. So it's going to take time because we cannot afford a terrorist incident to be in our country.
How big is the danger in Jordan? Your Prime Minister warned about sleeper cells of the Daesh, so-called Islamic.
A prime example is this refugee camp, and we have picked up a lot of people that have crossed the border over the past 4 or 5 years that are linked to ISIS and other organizations. So it's an ongoing problem as you faced in Europe and in the other parts of the world. That's the reality of the world that we're living in. So to have pressure by certain groups of just looking the other way and letting refugees in just because they say we have to, and then open our society to a potential terrorist strike, somewhere along the line we have to put our foot down.
And yet you know the real solution to this is an end to the war in Syria, a political solution. It's nowhere in sight.
Well, for the first time, with all difficult odds stacked up against the process, is what we're seeing in Geneva and the Vienna talks. Because the alternative is, as you say, no hope. And the only thing that is going for Syria at the moment is there are state institutions still functioning. For how long? Once those state institutions crumble, then there'll be no capability to govern Syria from an ability to reach out to the people. The people will suffer more. There'll be more refugee problems for all of us in Europe, including the region. And the only people who will win will be the terrorist organizations. So the only thing that we have, the only light at the end of the tunnel are these talks.
Is the Russian intervention a game changer? It's clear the pattern of their bombing, their diplomacy is aimed at strengthening President Assad.
Well, it shook up the tree because before that, really, we've had 6 years of pretty much the same thing. What
fell from the tree? People are saying that the bombing is not primarily against Daesh, the so-called Islamic State. It's against the opposition forces, some of whom are backed by your government and by the West.
Well, I won't get into the details of who said what or who did what, because that doesn't help at this stage. But what it has done,
You know, they're bombing in southern Syria, close to your border.
We did have an initial ceasefire. That ceasefire has broken. We hope that ceasefire will come back into effect. But having said that, it has galvanized everybody to get to the peace talks, because if we don't, it's going to unravel into a very messier situation in Syria. So we've had the talks started in Geneva, and I think at the end of the day is, between you and I, is can we get from the Western Eastern perspective, based on sort of old Cold War mentality, can Washington and Moscow look to the future and understand that we are actually dealing with something worse than the Cold War? Moscow and Washington are no longer each other's enemies. We're dealing with the Khawarij, the outlaws of Islam. That is the global threat. And I'm hoping that Vienna will dawn on all the players that that's where the common ground is. And if that can happen, then Syria could have a political solution. That's the only thing we've got going for us at this point of time. If not, then state infrastructure will fall apart. It'll be a disaster for the Syrian people, and the bad people will win.